Every morning, she stepped off the bus, her worn-out uniform and head bowed. No one knew her name, but from his glass office, a millionaire watched her in silence, and the truth would eventually shatter him from within. The scream tore through the marble lobby like breaking glass. "Stop her! That woman has something that doesn't belong to her." Sarah Miller froze 2 steps from the revolving door of Sterling Tower, her purse clutched against her chest, her fingers so tense her knuckles ached. She didn't turn immediately, closing her eyes for an instant, breathing in the cold air conditioning, and only then slowly turned towards the voice, pointing at her from the top of the grand staircase. Facing her, arm outstretched and face flushed, was Rebecca Sterling, the chief operating officer and right-hand woman of the empire's owner. And behind Rebecca, like a silent tide, dozens of employees began to emerge from their workstations, drawn by the scandal, like moths to a flame. "Miss Miller," Rebecca said, descending the steps, one by one, savoring each word. "Open that purse right now, in front of everyone." Sarah didn't respond. Her heart pounded so hard she feared others could hear it. She knew what was inside that purse. She knew that if she opened it, everything she had fought for in silence would be exposed before the eyes of people who had never had to choose between pride and survival. That morning had started like any other. The city bus route that crossed downtown had dropped her off, as always, 3 blocks from the tallest, most gleaming tower in the financial district. Sarah had walked those 3 blocks with her head down, not out of shame for her job, but because she had learned that in that world of polished glass and expensive perfumes, it was better to be invisible. She had spent years cleaning the floors of Sterling Tower. She knew every corner of that building better than anyone. The hallways no one walked, the offices that closed at dusk, the echo of her own footsteps when the whole world had already gone home and she was still scrubbing the windows of the highest floor. She was the first to arrive and often the last to leave. And in all that time, she had never taken anything that wasn't hers, until that morning. "Are you deaf?" Rebecca insisted, planting herself a yard away with her arms crossed. "I'm giving you a chance to clear this up. The supply closet camera recorded you putting something away, so you can open your purse willingly, or I'll call security, and we'll do it the hard way." A murmur swept through the lobby. Some employees discreetly pulled out their phones. Others whispered to each other, covering their mouths with their hands. Sarah felt every gaze pierce her skin like needles. She recognized faces she had greeted for years with a kind smile. Faces that now watched her with that cruel curiosity people reserve for others' misfortunes. "I didn't steal anything," Sarah finally said, her voice firmer than she expected. "We'll see about that," Rebecca replied. It was then that, in the tense silence of the lobby, the soft sound of the private elevator opening was heard, and from it emerged him. David Sterling, owner and CEO of the corporate group bearing his name, advanced a few steps and stopped at the top of the staircase. He said nothing. There was no need. His mere presence was enough to silence the murmur abruptly, like a blown-out candle. He was a man accustomed to the world falling silent when he appeared. His eyes scanned the scene, his sister pointing a finger, the clustered employees, and in the center of it all, that woman in a cleaning uniform, whom he had seen 1,000 times without ever truly seeing her, a background figure, just another piece of furniture in his glass tower. "What's happening here?" he asked in that low, controlled voice that was more frightening than any shout. "We're stopping a theft, brother," Rebecca said, chin raised. "Inventory hasn't been adding up for a while. Merchandise is missing from the warehouse, and today the camera finally showed the culprit." David slowly descended the steps. Each step echoed on the marble. He stopped in front of Sarah, so close she could smell the cool scent of his cologne. He looked down at her with the glacial distance of someone observing something they don't understand and fundamentally don't care to understand. "Is this true?" he asked. Sarah looked up, and for the first time in all those years, her eyes met those of the man who signed her paycheck every month. There was something in her gaze that he couldn't name. It wasn't fear, it wasn't guilt, it was something else. It was the weariness of someone who had endured too much for too long. "I have never stolen anything from anyone, sir, in my entire life," she said. "Then open the purse," Rebecca interjected. "If you have nothing to hide, it won't cost you anything." The entire lobby held its breath. A young man from accounting murmured, "Open it, open it." An older woman shook her head uncomfortably. Someone else held up their phone a little higher. Sarah looked at the purse she clutched against her chest. She looked at David. She looked at the crowd awaiting her humiliation like people awaiting the end of a movie. And she understood there was no escape. Her hands trembling, not from fear but from contained rage, She took a step towards the reception desk. She placed the purse on the marble surface with strange delicacy, as if it contained something fragile and sacred. She lifted the flap and opened it. "Go ahead," she said without looking at anyone. Look at what I'm capable of stealing." Rebecca approached with a triumphant smile and plunged her hand into the purse. Her smile froze because she pulled out neither jewelry, nor money, nor the expensive merchandise missing from the warehouse. She pulled out, one by one, the objects that woman carried with her every day of her life. A small, almost empty bottle of cough syrup, a pair of work gloves mended with thread, half a loaf of bread wrapped in a napkin saved for later, and among it all, a worn-out child's shoe fell to the floor, tumbling on the polished marble, small, with the sole detached and tied with a string to keep it from coming apart. The lobby fell silent. Rebecca stood with her hand in the air, not knowing what to do. The young man from accounting lowered his phone. The older woman brought her hand to her mouth, and Sarah, her dignity intact despite everything, slowly bent down, picked up the little shoe from the floor, and pressed it against her chest as if a piece of her soul had just been torn out. "You see," she said, and her voice finally broke, just enough to sting. "This is my great haul. This is what I take home. You can laugh now." No one laughed. David watched the scene without moving. Something within him, something that had been locked away for years, stirred without permission. That little shoe, that kneeling woman, that scene so small and yet so enormous at the same time. "There must be a mistake," Rebecca murmured, taking a step back. The camera recorded her, putting something from the warehouse away. "I put away a bottle of syrup," Sarah replied, standing up. "Just one of the ones the company was going to discard because they were about to expire. I asked the night shift supervisor, and he told me to take it, that they were going into the trash anyway." She closed her purse. "If that makes me a thief in front of everyone, then go ahead, call the police. But first, I want you all to look me in the face. I want you to look closely." And something unexpected happened. The employees, one after another, lowered their gaze. None could meet hers. It was at that instant, as Sarah gathered her belongings from the counter, that David noticed something. From the bottom of the purse, half fallen out, a piece of laminated cardboard peeked out an old employee ID badge, the kind Sterling Tower had stopped using years ago. It was so worn that the photograph was barely distinguishable. But he distinguished it. David leaned down, almost unaware of what he was doing, and took the ID before she could put it away. He brought it closer to his eyes, and the face of that powerful man, the man who never lost his composure, changed completely. The blood drained from his face, his lips trembled. In that blurry photograph was a young, smiling man, wearing the same uniform that operators used to wear, and beneath the photo, a printed name that David read once, and then again, as if he couldn't believe it. "Where?" His voice came out hoarse, almost inaudible. "Where did you get this?" Sarah looked at him, not understanding her boss's trembling. She held out her hand to retrieve the ID. "It's mine," she said firmly. "It's the only thing I have left of him. Give it back to me." Of him, David didn't release the ID. His eyes went from the photo to the woman's face, searching for something, connecting dots. He refused to connect. "Who is this man to you?" And Sarah, unaware that her answer was about to collapse David Sterling's entire world, uttered the words that would leave the entire lobby in absolute silence. "He is my son's father, the man who worked for your company until the last day of his life, and the man your family left to die." The little shoe fell to the floor again, and this time no one dared to pick it up. The silence in the lobby weighed like a tombstone. David Sterling still held the old ID card between his fingers, and no matter how tightly he squeezed it, he couldn't stop the letters from trembling before his eyes. Michael Hayes, that name, that young, smiling face in the blurry photograph, a name he had whispered too many nights. A man he believed buried along with the part of his life he had chosen to forget. "All of you, back to your stations," he said suddenly, without raising his voice. But there was something so broken in his tone that no one dared to disobey. The employees slowly dispersed, looking back, whispering. Rebecca took a step towards her brother. "David, you can't believe this, Woom. Go back to your office, Rebecca." He cut her off without looking at her. "Now." Rebecca opened her mouth to protest, but something in her brother's face made her swallow her words. She left, her heels clattering furiously on the marble, but not before giving Sarah a sharp glance, the look of someone who neither forgets nor forgives a public humiliation. And then they were alone, the most powerful man in the building and the woman who cleaned his floors, face to face with a child's shoe still lying on the floor between them. "Come with me," David said. "I'm not going anywhere with you," Sarah replied, picking up the little shoe and putting it back in her purse. "You've had your show. I'm going home. Please." The words seemed to cost him the world, as if his lips were unaccustomed to forming it. Just need us to talk alone." There was something in that please that disarmed Sarah more than any order. She looked at him for a long time, and perhaps because she was tired, perhaps because she had spent years waiting for someone in that building to truly look her in the eyes, she nodded. The office on the top floor was a world apart. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows, the entire city sprawling below like a board of lights. Sarah had cleaned that space hundreds of times, always in the early morning, always alone. She knew every inch of that carpet, every speck of dust on those shelves, but she had never been there with anyone, never in broad daylight. She felt strangely out of place, standing in the center of the room she herself kept immaculate. David carefully placed the ID badge on the desk, as if it were made of glass. "Tell me about Michael," he said, sinking into the armchair. "Tell me everything, please." Sarah clutched her purse to her lap. "Why do you care? To you, he's just a name on an old card." "You're wrong," he murmured. "He's much more than that." She watched him distrustfully, but there was something in the way the man looked at the ID, with a mixture of pain and guilt, that made her hesitate. She took a deep breath and began to speak with the voice of someone unearthing a grave. "Michael started working for this company when he was just a young man, in maintenance, with the machines in the sub-basement. He was the best. Everyone said so. He could fix anything with his hands." A sad smile escaped her. "He fell in love with me at the bus stop, you know? He saw me every morning and didn't dare to speak to me. It took him weeks to gather the courage. We got married with what little we had. We were happy. Very happy." She paused. Her fingers tightened on her purse. "When our son was born, Michael cried with joy. He said he was going to give him everything he never had. He worked double, triple shifts. He never missed a single day, not when he was sick, not when it rained, not when his body no longer responded, because he was afraid. Afraid that if he missed work, they would replace him. That's how things work for those who work below, Mr. Sterling. You're replaceable. You're just a number." David lowered his gaze. "One day, there was an accident in the sub-basement," Sarah continued, her voice hardening. "One of the old machines, those that hadn't been maintained for years, because someone decided repairing them cost too much. Michael was underneath when it collapsed. They pulled him out with a shattered back. They told him he would recover. They told him the company would take care of everything." She looked up, her eyes shining. "They lied." The silence grew thick. When the treatment started to cost real money, when it became clear that Michael wouldn't walk again like before, the company discarded him. Like a broken machine, they denied him compensation. They said the accident was his fault for not following protocols, the same protocols they never updated. They drowned us in paperwork, in lawyers, in signatures that never came. And meanwhile, Michael faded away in a bed, unable to work, watching us sink. A tear rolled down her cheek, but her voice didn't tremble. "We sold everything, even our wedding ring, and it wasn't enough. The right treatment cost more than 2 entire lives like ours could afford. Michael held on as long as he could. For us, for his son, but a body has a limit, sir." She wiped the tear with the back of her hand. "He left one morning in silence, as he lived, and the last thing he told me was to take care of our boy and not to hate anyone, because hate doesn't bring back the dead." The office fell silent. Below, the city still shimmered, indifferent. David had brought a hand to his mouth. His breathing had become ragged. "When?" he managed to ask. "When did all this happen?" "Years ago," Sarah replied. "Long enough for you to forget. Not long enough for me to." David rose from the armchair, walked to the window, and pressed his forehead against the cold glass. His shoulders, those shoulders that supported an empire, trembled. "I knew Michael Hayes," he said, his voice broken. Sarah stood up abruptly. "What?" "He wasn't just an employee." David turned, and now his eyes were filled with tears. "Before all this, before the tower, before the money, we were just 2 young men. I also started from the bottom, even if I tried hard to forget it. Michael and I loaded boxes in the same warehouse when my father's company was just a storage unit and a borrowed truck." He ran a hand over his face. "One night there was a fire in that warehouse. I got trapped between the boxes. Everyone ran. Everyone but one." His voice completely broke. "Michael went back in for me. He carried me out on his back as the roof was collapsing. He saved my life, ma'am. Your husband saved my life, and I repaid him by letting my own company treat him like trash." Sarah gasped. The entire room seemed to tilt. You knew who he was?" "I didn't know," David confessed. "That's the horror. When his accident happened, I was abroad closing deals. blind to everything happening in my own sub-basements. I signed dozens of documents without reading them. I delegated, I trusted, and when I returned, Michael was just a closed file, another resolved case. I didn't even recognize his name on the papers, because I didn't even bother to read them. He collapsed back into the armchair, burying his face in his hands. I spent years looking for him, you know. When I finally remembered, when I finally wanted to thank him for what he did for me, it was too late. No one knew where his family was. They had disappeared. And here you were all this time, cleaning my floors, carrying his ID in your purse, and I walked past you every day without seeing you. A silent cry shook them both. Two worlds that should never have crossed, united by a dead man who had loved them both in his own way. But Sarah gradually stopped crying, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of the widow. It was something else, something colder, more resolute. There's something you don't know, Mr. Sterling. David looked up. I didn't come to this company by chance, she said very slowly. It wasn't fate that put me here to clean your floors. I sought out this job. For months, I sent applications with a different last name, with documents that hid who I was. I did everything possible to get into this tower without anyone suspecting. Why? He asked in a thin voice. Because before he died, Michael told me one last thing, something I didn't tell you. Sarah approached the desk, her eyes burning. He told me his accident wasn't an accident, that he had discovered something in those machines. Someone inside this company didn't want to come to light, and that's why they silenced him. David's face drained of all color. I've been cleaning these floors in the early morning for years, sir, Sarah said, alone with the keys to every office in my hands. Do you really think I was just dusting? She pulled a small, folded folder from her purse, protected in a worn plastic bag. I found this, and there's a name of someone who still works in this tower, someone who signed the order to silence my husband, and that name, she swallowed. That name is going to break your heart much more than I've already broken it today. She placed the folder on the desk, and David, his hand trembling, opened it. The folder opened on the desk, and David Sterling felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Inside were no jewels or shining secrets. There were yellowed papers protected with an almost religious devotion, and on the first page, written in the cramped, nervous hand of a man who knew he was in danger, was the report Michael Hayes had drafted shortly before his accident. David read every line. Michael had detected that the sub-basement machines were on the verge of collapse. He had warned in writing that someone was still signing off machines as repaired, that had never been touched, that money allocated for maintenance was vanishing into thin air, and that if no one did anything, a worker would end up gravely injured. That worker ended up being himself. He reported it, David murmured, his voice broken. He warned them, and instead of listening to him, they silenced him. Sarah completed. Keep reading. David turned to the last page. It was the internal order that filed Michael's report under the stamp. No action required. The signature authorizing that silence should have been at the bottom of the document, but it wasn't. Someone had torn it off. The paper was ripped precisely where the name should have been, with surgical precision, as if whoever did it knew exactly the weight of that signature. The name is missing, David said. I know, Sarah replied. When I found the folder forgotten in a dead file archive in the sub-basement, it was already like that. Someone got ahead of me. Someone in this tower knew these papers were a bomb and erased their tracks. The same person who diverted the maintenance money, the same person who, years later, is still diverting what you call missing merchandise from the warehouse. David's head snapped up. The theft Rebecca has been reporting to me. It's not theft by a cleaner, sir, Sarah said with icy calm. It's the same thief as always, only this time, without realizing it, they almost used me as a shield. That's why they singled me out today. Someone needed a quick culprit before the accounts were thoroughly reviewed. Everything began to fall into place in David's mind, like dark pieces of a puzzle he himself had refused to look at for years. The accident, the money, the silence, and now an invisible thief still operating under his own roof, hidden behind a smile he saw every day. Do you know who it is? He asked. I have a suspicion. Sarah closed the folder and put it away. But a suspicion is not proof. And in this building, a cleaner's word against a fancy suit is worth nothing. You yourself proved that today in the lobby. The blow hit its mark. David lowered his gaze, ashamed. Let me help you, he said suddenly. Money, a better position, a house, whatever you need. I owe your husband my life. Let me settle that debt. Sarah slowly stood up, and when she looked at him, there was no hatred in her eyes. There was something worse. There was wounded pride. My husband didn't save you from the fire so that one day you could buy my silence with a check, she said. Michael never used that friendship, never knocked on your door to ask for anything, not even when he was dying. Do you know why? Because he said a man's dignity is not begged for, and I will not stain his memory by selling it now. She picked up her purse. I don't want your money, Mr. Sterling. I want justice. And those two things don't always fit in the same envelope. And without another word, she left the office, leaving David alone, sunk in the armchair, the weight of years of blindness falling upon him like debris. That afternoon, David couldn't work. He couldn't sign a single paper. The image of that woman walking out with her head held high, rejecting his money, pierced his chest like a splinter. He needed to understand. He needed to know what kind of life that woman, whom he had seen 1,000 times without ever seeing, carried on her shoulders. So, he did something unthinkable for a man like him. He followed her. He watched her leave the building through the service entrance, purse on her shoulder, walking the usual 3 blocks to the bus stop. He saw her board a crowded city bus, squeezed among strangers, holding onto a bar with one hand while the other protected her purse against her body. And from his car, slowly moving through traffic, David followed her down avenues that grew narrower, grayer, more alien to his glass world. The bus stopped many times. Sarah got off in a neighborhood he didn't know, a place where asphalt gave way to dirt and houses seemed to lean on each other to keep from falling. David parked at a distance, feeling absurd in his gleaming car amidst so much need. He got out and followed her on foot, in the shadow of walls, his heart growing tighter with each step. Sarah walked to a modest, peeling house and pushed open a creaking door. David approached a half-open window, and what he saw took his breath away. A child was waiting inside. Not a baby, but a boy. One of those who are no longer children, but not yet men. At that fragile age where the world begins to weigh too soon, as soon as he saw his mother, he ran to her and hugged her with desperate strength. "You're here, Mom," the boy said. "I was worried. You took longer today." "Everything's fine, Ethan," Sarah replied, stroking his hair. It was just a long day. David watched the scene through the fogged glass. The room was small, humble, but impeccably clean. Every object was arranged with the meticulousness of someone who doesn't have much, but cherishes what little they do have. On a shelf, illuminated by the faint light of a lamp, rested a photograph, and in front of it, placed like a relic on an altar, was a child's shoe, the same one that had fallen on the marble that morning. Ethan followed his mother's gaze to the shelf. "Did you take it out of your purse again?" the boy asked with a sad smile. "I carry it with me every day," Sarah replied. "You know that." "It doesn't fit me anymore, Mom," Ethan said, looking at his now large feet. "That shoe is from when I was little. That's why I keep it." Sarah sat next to him and took the little shoe in her hands. "Do you remember who gave it to you?" "Dad," the boy whispered. "It was the last thing he managed to buy you with his own hands before he couldn't get out of bed anymore." Sarah's voice filled with infinite tenderness. "He was so happy that day. He said he wanted to see you walk in those shoes towards a better future. That's why I keep it. Because as long as I have it close, it's like your dad is still walking beside us." Outside, in the gloom, David brought a hand to his mouth to stifle the sound of his own crying. That little shoe was not an forgotten object in a purse. It was the last hug of a father who was no longer there. And that morning, he had allowed it to be treated as evidence of a crime. "Mom," Ethan then said with a more serious voice, "that premature seriousness of children who grow up too fast. I know you work a lot. I know sometimes you don't eat so I can eat. I know, even if you don't tell me." He swallowed. "I'm almost old enough. Let me find a job. It's not fair for you to carry everything alone." "No," Sarah replied firmly, taking his face in her hands. "You're going to study. You're going to do everything your father dreamed you would be. I'll endure anything, Ethan, anything. But you are not going to give up your books. That's the only deal I have with life, and I don't intend to break it." The boy hugged her, and in that embrace were years of silent sacrifice, disguised hunger, of love that needed no words. David couldn't take it anymore. He staggered back from the window, and then, as he turned in the gloom, his foot hit an empty can that rolled noisily across the dirt floor. The sound broke the stillness of the night. Inside, the conversation stopped abruptly. Footsteps were heard, the door burst open, and Ethan, the boy, stepped out into the darkness, with a trembling flashlight in his hand, illuminating the face of the elegant man who had been spying from the shadows. For an instant, neither of them moved. The boy stared at him, and instead of screaming, instead of being scared, he narrowed his eyes as if recognizing something impossible. He slowly lowered the flashlight and, in a voice that made David's heart stop, asked, Are you the man from the tower? Dad's friend? David couldn't articulate a word. My dad told me about you before he left, Ethan continued, his eyes welling with tears. He told me that one day maybe you would come, and he told me to keep something for you, not to give it to anyone else, only to you. The boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope, wrinkled by time and by the hands that had protected it for years. I've kept it all this time, he said, holding it out. On the front, in Michael Hayes's unmistakable handwriting, was a single line written, "For Dave, the day the truth finds you." David took the envelope with hands that no longer obeyed him. The paper was soft from years, folded and unfolded so many times that the corners had become almost transparent. He instantly recognized that tight, slanting handwriting. It was the same as in the report, the same with which, years ago, a young man used to write notes stuck to boxes in the warehouse to remind him not to skip meals when they worked double shifts. "May I come in?" David asked, his voice barely audible. Sarah appeared in the doorway behind her son. Her face hardened as she recognized him. "You followed me home," she said, and there was more pain than anger in her voice. "All the way here, sir? Wasn't it enough to humiliate me in your tower? You have every right to hate me," he replied. "Every right. But I swear I didn't come to humiliate anyone. I came because I couldn't sleep without knowing how the family of the man who saved my life was living." "And why?" He looked at the envelope. "Because it seems your husband knew this day would come." Ethan looked at his mother. "Dad made me promise to give it to Mr. Sterling. Only to him. I kept my promise." Sarah looked at her son, then at the man trembling in the gloom, holding her husband's last message. Something in her gave way, not resentment, but the door. "Come in," she finally said, "but leave your apologies outside. We don't need them here." David entered that humble house as one enters a temple. He sat where Sarah indicated, on a wooden chair next to a modest table, and under the trembling light of the lamp, with Ethan and Sarah watching him in silence, he opened the envelope and began to read. "Dave, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and life has finally crossed your path with my family's. I don't know how it happened. I want to believe it was destiny, and not chance that put you in front of them. I'm not writing to accuse you of anything. I know you didn't know what happened to me. I've known you since we were two young men with nothing, and I know that Dave, who carried me out of that fire, would never have let me be treated the way I was. The problem, old friend, wasn't you. The problem is that you stopped looking. You let others look for you, and when a powerful man stops looking down, there's always someone ready to steal in the darkness he no longer watches. I discovered things, Dave, ugly things. Money for worker safety was disappearing, false signatures, repairs that only existed on paper. I reported it, and instead of thanking me, someone decided I was in the way. I'm not asking for revenge. I'm asking for something more difficult. I'm asking you to look again, to open the eyes you closed the day you became rich. Do it for me, but above all, do it for them. Take care of my Sarah, even if she never lets you, because she is the proudest and kindest woman you will ever know. And take care of my Ethan. Promise him he will study, that he will be more than I could ever be. And one last thing, Dave, the one who silenced me is not far from you. Never was. They are closer than you could ever imagine. Look where you least want to look. There, right there, is the truth. Your brother from that warehouse, Michael." David put down the letter, and for a long moment, he couldn't say anything. Tears fell freely down his face, and he did nothing to stop them. The powerful man, the owner of the city's tallest tower, wept like a child in a house with peeling walls. "He forgave me," he whispered, not even knowing if he deserved it. "He forgave me." Sarah, who had read the letter over his shoulder, slowly sat down. A tear rolled down her cheek. It was the first time in all those years that she felt the weight she carried alone had someone else willing to lift it with her. "He was always like that," she said softly. "He forgave before he was asked for forgiveness. I used to tell him he was too good for this world, and perhaps that's why the world couldn't take care of him." David folded the letter with infinite reverence and put it away near his heart. "He wrote something here that chilled my blood. He said the one who silenced him is close to me, closer than I imagine." He looked up at Sarah. "You said you had a suspicion. I need you to tell me who it is. It's no longer just justice for Michael. Now it's a promise I made to a dead man." Sarah was silent for a long moment. Then she stood up, went to a corner of the room, and moved a loose floorboard. From that makeshift hiding place, she pulled out a second folder, thicker, more organized years of patient work, of early mornings collecting crumbs of evidence while cleaning empty offices. "I don't just have a suspicion," she said, placing it on the table. "I have a pattern. All this time, while you thought I was just dusting, I was noting dates when merchandise disappeared, Nights when certain offices stayed lit late for no reason, papers that appeared in the trash and shouldn't have been there. She opened the folder. Inside were pages covered in small, neat handwriting, with dates marked vaguely, like the night of the storm, the day of quarterly closing, the week the old accountant was fired, without exact timestamps but with an implacable logic. Every time money or merchandise was missing, Sarah explained, there was a constant. Only one person who always had access. Only one person who was always in the building on those nights. Only one person who, curiously, was the one who filed my husband's report under the "no action required" stamp. David felt the air grow dense. "Tell me the name." Sarah looked him in the eyes and for the first time hesitated, not out of fear, but out of compassion for the man in front of her. "Are you sure you want to know?" she asked. "Because once you know, you won't be able to look at that person the same way ever again, and it will hurt. It will hurt your soul." "Michael wrote to look where I least wanted to look," David said, his jaw clenched. "Tell me." Sarah took a deep breath. She ran a finger over the last page of the folder, where she had written, in trembling handwriting, the conclusion of years of silence, and she pronounced the name. David froze. The blood drained from his face. He stood up from the chair so abruptly that he almost knocked it over. "No," he said, "it's impossible. That person has been by my side from the beginning. I trusted them with everything, with the company, with my money, with my life." "I know," Sarah said softly. "That's why it works so well. No one suspects someone so close they become invisible. I learned that firsthand, sir. Sometimes the closest people are the ones who can betray us most easily, because they are the ones we watch the least." David paced the small room, his breathing heavy, shaking his head, searching for an explanation he couldn't find. "I need proof," he finally said. "Not a theory. Real proof. Something I can hold up in front of a judge, in front of a board. Something no one can tear off a paper like they tore off that signature. And that's where I need you," Sarah replied, standing up. "I have the pattern. You have the keys. You have access to the financial records that I could never touch. If we combine what I know with what you can unlock, we'll catch that person. But it has to be in silence, because if they find out we're investigating, they'll make everything disappear, just like they made my husband disappear." David stopped. He looked at that woman, at that boy who watched him from a corner with his father's eyes. And in that instant, something changed within him forever. He was no longer the cold owner of a glass tower. He was a man with a debt, a promise, and for the first time in many years, a purpose. "Agreed?" he said, extending his hand to her. "We do it together. For Michael." Sarah looked at that outstretched hand. The hand of the man who that morning had allowed her humiliation. The hand of the man her husband had saved. The hand of an unexpected ally. She shook it. "For Michael," she repeated, but neither of them knew that to you have Lee, to your In an office lit late atop Sterling Tower, a nervous voice on the other end of the phone whispered a warning. The boss was seen leaving behind the cleaner. "They're both together. I think the woman knows something." And from the other end of the line, a cold hand hung up the phone, opened a drawer, and pulled out a folder, identical to the one Sarah kept under her floor. Only this one still had the missing signature intact. The name kept echoing in David's head all the way back to the tower. Rebecca, his own sister, the woman with whom he had shared childhood in that small house, before the money, before everything. The one who had been by his side the day their father was buried. The one he had named his chief operating officer because, he believed, she was the only person in the world who would never betray him. And yet, there it was, in Sarah's neat handwriting. Every disappearance of money, every night of lights on, every paper buried under the "no action required" stamp, it all led, like a river to the sea, to a single person with the key to everything. David didn't sleep that night, nor the next. He became a stranger in his own home, watching his sister during meetings, searching her face for cracks in the lie, and finding them in small details. The way Rebecca changed the subject when someone mentioned the sub-basement, the way her fingers tensed whenever he talked about reviewing old files. "We work at night," Sarah had told him. "When the tower sleeps is when the truth wakes up." So they began. The financial archives of Sterling Tower were kept in a cold room in the basement floor, behind a door that only 3 people were authorized to open. One of them was David, another Rebecca. One early morning, when the building fell silent, David went down with his key. Sarah was waiting inside in her usual uniform and mended gloves, because a cleaner entering a floor at that hour raises no one's suspicions. It was the perfect alibi. Her invisibility, which for years had been her curse, was now her weapon. "Look for money movements from the time of Michael's accident," Sarah said. pointing to the shelves packed with folders. I have the dates, you have the access. They worked for hours, shoulder to shoulder, the owner of the empire and the woman who swept his floors, united by a shared grief. And little by little, among thousands of papers, the pattern emerged. Checks issued to non-existent maintenance companies, invoices for repairs never carried out, sums that left the worker safety account and disappeared into addresses that led nowhere, all signed with the same rubric. David held one of the checks under the trembling light, and his hand began to shake. "It's her handwriting," he murmured. "It's my sister's handwriting." But then, checking the digital backup on the terminal in the room, he discovered something that chilled his blood for a second time. The electronic records had been deleted. Someone had accessed the system just a few days earlier and meticulously removed every digital trace of those transactions. "She got there before us," David said, slumping into a chair. "She knew we were coming. She erased everything." "On paper." "No," Sarah said, clutching the physical checks to her chest. "She forgot about the paper. People like her always trust machines and despise what is done by hand. But these checks are real. We have them." David looked at her with a mixture of admiration and hope. "With this, we can stop her," he said. "With this, it all ends." Sarah did not share his optimism. There was something in the silence of that room, in the ease with which they had found the physical trail, that deeply troubled her. "It's too easy, sir," she whispered. "Someone who was careful enough to erase everything digital, would they overlook these papers? Or did she want us to find them?" The answer came sooner than either of them expected. The next day, as Sarah walked the usual 3 blocks to the tower, 2 uniformed officers intercepted her in the middle of the street. One of them held a warrant. "Sarah Miller?" the officer asked. "You need to come with us. There's a formal complaint against you for continuous theft from Sterling Company, and now, additionally, for manipulation of financial documents." The world stopped. "I didn't." Sarah felt her legs give way. "I didn't steal anything. You're making a mistake. You can explain that to the judge, ma'am." As she was led away, people at the bus stop paused to watch. The same anonymous faces she shared every morning now looked at her with distrust, murmuring. And Sarah, her hands trembling, could only think of one thing. Of Ethan, alone at home, waiting for a mother who might not return that night. "My son," she pleaded with the officers. "Please, I have a son waiting for me. He has no one else in the world. You can't leave him alone." But her words were lost in the street noise. When the news reached David, he dropped the phone. He ran. He ran as he hadn't remembered running in years, down the private elevator, across the marble lobby where it had all begun, ignoring employees who called out to him. He drove himself, without a chauffeur, to the station where Sarah was being held. And upon arriving, his heart pounding, he came face to face with the last person he wanted to see waiting for him at the door. Rebecca stood there, serene, with a calm that was more terrifying than any scream. She waited for him as one waits for a guest. "Brother," she said with a cold smile. "I knew you'd come running for her. How predictable you've become. What did you do?" David's voice trembled with rage. "What did you do to that woman?" "I know what you are, Rebecca. I know about the checks, about the maintenance, about Michael. I know everything." Rebecca didn't even blink. "Keep your voice down," she said calmly. "You don't want to make a scene again." "That man saved my life," David said, his eyes burning. "And you destroyed him. You destroyed his family for money." "All this for money, not for money," she replied, and for the first time, her mask cracked, revealing something old and bitter. "Do you really think it's about money, David? It's about how Dad never looked at me, how he gave everything to you, the perfect son, while I, your own flesh and blood, had to beg for a place at the table." Her voice sharpened. "I built this empire as much as you did. I just took what was rightfully mine. What you did is unspeakable," David said. "And you're going to pay for it. I have the checks. I have proof." And then Rebecca smiled. A slow, poisonous smile. The smile of someone who has saved their best card for last. The checks. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. The same one David had seen in the sub-basement. The same, only this one still had the complete signature at the bottom of the document that ordered Michael to be silenced. "Go ahead. Present them. Show the world the checks signed by me. But first, read this carefully, little brother." She handed him the paper, and David, with a growing sense of dread in his chest, read the order that filed Michael's report, the one that condemned him. And at the bottom, next to Rebecca's signature, was another signature, a second rubric authorizing the filing, a signature that David recognized instantly, because he had stamped it himself thousands of times without reading, trusting blindly in whoever put the papers in front of him, his own signature. "You see?" Rebecca whispered, leaning closer to his ear. "You never read anything. You signed everything I put in front of you. So technically, dear brother, the order that let your beloved Michael die also bears your name. If I fall, you fall with me. And that poor widow in there will discover that the man who claims to want to help her is, on paper, as guilty of her husband's death as I am." David gasped. The document trembled in his hands. Behind the station glass, Sarah watched him, and though she couldn't hear the words, she saw David's face crumble. She saw the folder, saw Rebecca's triumphant smile, and for the first time since her husband's death, Sarah felt the firm ground of hope open beneath her feet. David reread that order again and again, and each time the signature at the bottom weighed heavier, like a stone tied around his neck. It was his rubric. There was no doubt. But as he looked at it, memory began to return the buried truth. He remembered those chaotic days when he returned from abroad after months of closing deals on the other side of the world. He remembered the enormous pile of documents Rebecca put in front of him as soon as he got off the plane. Exhausted, with the promise that everything had been reviewed and was in order. "Sign them and rest, brother," she had told him. "I've already taken care of everything while you were away." And he had signed dozens, hundreds of papers, without reading a single one, trusting, always trusting. Among those documents, mixed like a snake among flowers, was the order that buried Michael's report. "You used me as a shield from the beginning," David murmured, looking up at his sister. "You put my signature there on purpose, so that if it was ever discovered, I would fall with you." "You learn fast," Rebecca replied coldly. "You were always the favorite, but even the perfect son has a price, and yours was your own habit of never looking at what you signed." David closed his eyes. He could feel the weight of the trap closing. If he presented the evidence, Rebecca would show that signature and drag him down with her. The widow would discover that he, on paper, had also condemned Michael, and the promise he had made to a dead man would become the bitterest of ironies. A lesser man would have given in, would have destroyed the evidence, would have negotiated, would have saved his own name in exchange for silence. But something had changed within David since the night of the little shoe. "You're right," he finally said with a calm that surprised Rebecca. "My signature is there, and I will answer for it." "What?" "I signed without reading. I trusted someone I shouldn't have. And because of that negligence, a good man didn't receive justice." David straightened up. "That makes me guilty, Rebecca. Not of stealing, not of killing, but of closing my eyes. And I will take responsibility for it, before whoever needs to hear it. I'd rather fall telling the truth than reign over a lie, even if it costs me everything I have." For the first time, Rebecca's mask completely cracked. She hadn't counted on that. She had bet that her brother, like any powerful man, would choose to protect himself. She hadn't foreseen that a rich man's pride could bend to the memory of a poor man. "You're lying," she said, her voice uncertain for the first time. "No one throws their life away for a cleaner and her brat. That brat, as you call him, is the son of the man who carried me on his back through the flames," David replied. "And that cleaner has fought with more honor in a single day than you and I have had in our entire lives." Meanwhile, in a cold room at the station, Sarah waited with her hands clasped on a metal table. She wasn't crying. She had cried too much in her life to waste tears in front of those who had locked her up without listening. She only thought of Ethan. "I need to make a call," she asked the duty officer for the third time. "My son is alone. He's just a boy. He has no one else." The officer, a tired-looking man, looked at her for a long moment, and something in the serene dignity of that woman made him doubt the complaint on his desk. "Is it true that you work cleaning at Sterling Tower?" he asked. "For years," Sarah replied. "I never missed a day. I never took anything that wasn't trash they were going to throw away. You can ask anyone on the night shift." The officer frowned, looking at the papers again. Something didn't add up. The complaint had arrived with suspicious speed, signed by someone very high up, with an insistence that smelled more of revenge than justice. At that moment, the door to the room burst open, and David entered. "Release her," he said breathlessly. "This woman is innocent, and I have the evidence to prove it." Behind him entered Rebecca, pale, followed by two lawyers who could barely keep up with the collapsing scene. "Don't listen to her," Rebecca tried. "This man is confused. He's being manipulated by this." "Silence." David cut her off, his voice echoing in the room with new authority. "It's over, Rebecca." He placed a thick folder on the officer's desk, the physical checks, the invoices from phantom companies, and on top of everything, the order with the two signatures. "This woman stole nothing," he declared. "For years, Someone diverted money from my workers' safety and merchandise from my warehouses. That same person filed away an employee's complaint who discovered the fraud, condemning him. And today, that person tried to blame an innocent woman to cover their tracks. He pointed to the order. Here's the proof. And yes, officer, at the bottom of that document are 2 signatures. One is my sister, Rebecca Sterling's. The other is mine. Absolute silence fell upon the room. Sarah looked up, watching him without understanding. I signed that paper without reading it years ago, trusting blindly in someone who didn't deserve it, David continued, his voice firm, but his eyes moist. That makes me responsible for negligence, and I am willing to answer to the law for it, with all consequences. But I will not allow an innocent woman to pay for a crime that we committed. Starting with me, Rebecca recoiled, searching the faces of her lawyers for an escape that no longer existed. The speed with which she had orchestrated the false complaint, the insistence, the signature from above pushing for an express arrest. Everything now turned against her, drawing the exact map of her guilt. Process this, the officer ordered his partner, taking the folder. And no one leaves here until we clarify who reported this lady and why. Sarah slowly stood up. She looked at David, that man who had just risked his name, his company, his freedom, just to keep her from falling. The same man who days earlier had allowed her humiliation in a marble lobby. Why? She asked him softly. With that signature, you could have let me sink and saved yourself. No one would have known. Because your husband went back into a burning building for me when the easiest thing was to run, David replied. The least I can do is enter the fire for his family, even if it burns me. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not tears of pain. Hours later, Sarah emerged from the station, free, with the complaint dismissed and a formal investigation opened, this time against the true culprits. The night air had never seemed so clean to her, but as soon as she crossed the door, a thought pierced her like lightning. Ethan, she whispered. He's been alone too many hours. David didn't hesitate for an instant. My car's outside. I'll drive you. They crossed the city in silence. The woman from the bus and the owner of the tower, now united by something stronger than the past. And when they arrived in the neighborhood of dirt streets, Sarah ran towards her house with her heart in her throat, pushed open the door, and stopped abruptly. The room was empty, the lamp on, Michael's photograph in its place, but the little shoe from the shelf had disappeared. And on the table, written in a boy's trembling handwriting, was a note. Mom, if you're reading this, don't be scared. I saw through the window when the police took you. I heard them say it was for theft from the tower company. I'm not going to let them blame you. I went to find the truth myself. I took Dad's shoe for courage. Forgive me. I'll be back soon. I love you. Ethan. Sarah dropped the paper, her hand on her chest. No, she whispered. No, son. You don't know what's out there. You don't know what those people are capable of. David read the note over her shoulder, and his face darkened. Where would he go? He asked. Where does a boy go to look for the truth? Sarah looked up, terror etched in her eyes. To the only place he thinks it is, she said, to the tower. And at that instant, David's phone vibrated. A message from Sterling Tower's head of security sent just minutes ago. Sir, a miner entered the building asking for you and Miss Sterling. He says he has proof about his father. Miss Sterling asked to speak with him alone in the sub-basement. They are going down now. The sub-basement. The same place where it had all begun. The same place where Michael had fallen. David and Sarah looked at each other, and the same thought chilled both their blood. Rebecca is cornered, David said, already running towards the car. And there's nothing more dangerous than someone who has already lost everything. The car sped across the city like an arrow in the night. Sarah was in the passenger seat, her son's note clutched in her hands, repeating his name softly like a prayer. David drove with a tense jaw, running red lights, his eyes fixed on the road that led them back to Sterling Tower. He'll be all right, he said, though he didn't know if he was saying it for her or for himself. We're going to make it in time. You don't know Rebecca as I've come to know her in these years, Sarah replied, her voice broken. I watched her from afar, sir. I observed her while cleaning. A person capable of letting a man die to cover her greed won't stop at a boy, and now she's cornered. Now she has nothing to lose. David pressed the accelerator. Then we're going to put that idea out of her head, he said, both of them. In the sub-basement of the tower, beneath the hum of old, dormant machines, Ethan advanced with a trembling flashlight in one hand and his father's little shoe in the other. The place was enormous, cold, full of shadows that seemed to move. There were rusty pipes hanging from the ceiling, dusty metal structures, a heavy silence that seeped into his bones. It was the place where his father had worked, the place where his father had fallen. And though fear gripped his chest, the boy kept walking, because there was something stronger than fear pushing him forward. Love for his mother. "I know the truth is here, Dad," he whispered, pressing the shoe against his chest. "Help me find it." "How brave," a voice said behind him. Ethan spun around. Rebecca stood beneath the only lit lamp, elegant, serene, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked at him with a calm that was more terrifying than any scream. "You came down all by yourself, didn't you?" she said, taking a slow step towards him. "So brave, so much like your father. He also believed the truth would save him. Look how that turned out for him." "You killed my dad," Ethan said, his voice trembling, but he didn't back down. "I didn't kill anyone," Rebecca replied with a cold smile. "Your father had an accident, a regrettable accident. Old machines are dangerous, you know? Down here, anything can happen to a child who's poking around where he shouldn't be." Ethan felt the danger in the air, thick like the dust. He took a step back, but his back hit a cold metal structure. "I have proof," he said, clinging to the only thing he had left. "My mom has everything written down, and I saw it. I saw the papers. I know what you did." Rebecca's smile vanished. "What papers?" she asked, and for the first time, her voice lost its calm. "What exactly did you see, boy?" "Everything." Ethan lied, his heart pounding against his ribs. "And I'm not the only one. Help is coming. You're not going to get away with this." Rebecca looked at him for a long time, weighing whether the boy was telling the truth, and in the doubt, in that instant of hesitation, the roar of an engine was heard above, the screech of brakes, hurried footsteps descending the emergency stairwell. "Ethan!" Sarah's voice echoed in the sub-basement like thunder. "Ethan, where are you?" the boy shouted. "I'm here. Here." Rebecca turned towards the stairs, and her face crumbled as Sarah appeared, and behind her, her own brother. She was surrounded, cornered in the same sub-basement where she had buried her first secret. Sarah ran to her son and hugged him with desperate strength, touching his face, his shoulders, making sure he was whole. "Are you all right? Did she do anything to you?" she asked through tears. "Never. Never do anything like that again. Do you hear me? I almost died, son. I almost died. I'm sorry, Mom." Ethan sobbed, clinging to her. "I just wanted to save you. I didn't want them to blame you for something you didn't do." David, meanwhile, slowly advanced towards his sister. "It's over, Rebecca," he said. "The police already have the checks. They have the invoices. They have the order with our signatures. I've already declared everything. I've already taken my part. There's nothing left you can do. No paper to tear, no signature to hide. You're alone." Rebecca retreated until she was under the lamp, and the harsh light carved shadows on her face. For a moment, the mask of the powerful woman completely fell, and underneath appeared someone smaller, older, a girl who never felt enough. "You don't understand," she said, and her voice broke. "You never understood. My whole life in the shadows. Rebecca, help your brother. Rebecca, learn from your brother. I worked just as hard as you. I gave the same years, the same nights. And when Dad died, to whom did he leave his name, his chair, his empire? To you, always. To you. I only took what no one wanted to give me." "What you took had an owner," David replied, with pain but without yielding. "It belonged to the workers who break their backs up there. It belonged to Michael. It belonged to this boy who grew up without his father because of a signature you hid." He shook his head. "Dad was wrong not to see you, Rebecca. It's true, but that didn't give you the right to steal an entire family's life to avenge yours." The words fell upon Rebecca like a sentence. She looked at Sarah, who was embracing her son. She looked at the worn little shoe the boy still held. And something in that image, in that mother and son, united by an object so small and so full of love, finally broke through the armor she had built for years. "I didn't want him to die," she said, and for the first time, tears appeared in her eyes. I just wanted him to be quiet. I signed the order to stop the investigation. I didn't think about the machines. I didn't think about him." Her voice completely broke. "I never think about people. That was always my problem." "Then start thinking now," Sarah said, standing up without letting go of Ethan. "Look at this child. Look at me. We are the people you never thought about, and despite everything you did, we are still standing here. That's what you never understood, ma'am. That dignity isn't stolen with a signature. It's carried within. Either you have it or you don't. And all your money could never buy you the dignity that we have in abundance." Rebecca didn't respond. She fell to her knees on the cold sub-basement floor, her face in her hands, and for the first time in her life, she cried without a mask, without calculation, without an audience to impress. She cried like a person who has just seen herself in the mirror and cannot bear what she finds. Minutes later, the blue lights of patrol cars stained the sub-basement walls. The tired-looking officer, the same one who had doubted the complaint against Sarah, came down with his colleagues. The investigation opened that same night, combined with the evidence David had provided, had advanced with a speed he hadn't expected. "Rebecca Sterling," the officer said, "you'll have to come with us." Rebecca slowly stood up. There was no arrogance left in her. Before she was led away, she paused for an instant in front of Sarah. She looked her in the eyes. "I'm sorry," she said in a barely audible whisper. "It doesn't fix anything. I know, but I needed to tell you. I'm sorry." Sarah looked at her for a long time and, with a strength only those who have truly suffered possess, replied, "My husband asked me before he left not to hate anyone, because hate doesn't bring back the dead." She took a breath. "I don't forgive you yet. Maybe I never will, but I'm not going to carry your guilt inside me. That's yours to carry now. That is your punishment, and it is heavier than any prison bars." Rebecca bowed her head and allowed herself to be led towards the surface, towards the light, towards the world she had betrayed. That night, none of the three slept. They stayed in Sarah's humble home with the lamp on, silently processing everything that had happened. David, seated in the same wooden chair from days earlier, looked at Michael's photograph on the shelf. "I made a promise," he finally said, breaking the silence. "In his letter, he asked me to take care of you, to look again, and I intend to fulfill it, not with charity," he quickly added, seeing Sarah open her mouth to protest. "I know you wouldn't accept it, and you're right not to. I propose it differently." "What way?" she asked, distrustful. "Justice," David replied. "The real kind, the one your husband asked for in his report and no one gave him." And so, as the weeks passed, that man who had spent years not looking down, dedicated every one of his days to looking. He confronted his company's board, publicly assumed responsibility for signing without reading, and instead of being ruined, as Rebecca had bet, his honesty elevated him in everyone's eyes. A powerful man who bows to the truth moves more than 1,000 men who hide behind it. He repaired every machine in the sub-basement, completely renovated the security system Michael had reported years ago, and created, with his own name and his own money, a permanent fund for the families of workers who suffered accidents, so that never again would a widow have to sell her wedding ring, or a child grow up in a house with peeling walls because of someone else's greed. He named it the Michael Hayes Foundation. The day it was inaugurated, with a simple plaque in the marble lobby of Sterling Tower, the same lobby where Sarah had been humiliated, David asked her to cut the ribbon. The same employees who one day had lowered their gaze in her shame now applauded on their feet, many of them with moist eyes. "I don't deserve this honor," Sarah said to everyone, her voice trembling. "The one who should be here is the truth, and the truth has the face of my husband, who gave his life without receiving anything in return. If this foundation exists, it's because he never stopped believing that kindness, though it may be slow, always finds its way back." There wasn't a dry eye in that room, but life, which knows about great and small justices, still had a tender chapter to write. Sarah never stopped being a working woman. The pride her husband so admired wouldn't allow it, but she no longer cleaned other people's floors in the early morning. David offered, and she accepted after many refusals, to direct the foundation that bore her husband's name. No one better than her, who had known hunger and injustice from within, to reach out to those who now lived them. Every morning, she still took the bus, not because she lacked anything, but because she said that up there, among ordinary people, among the tired faces going to earn their bread, was where the people the foundation existed to care for were. "The day I stop getting on that bus," she once told David, "will be the day I start to forget where I come from. And whoever forgets where they come from, sooner or later, stops looking, as you yourself learned." David smiled as he listened to her, because she was right, always right. And Ethan, the boy who one night went alone into a dark sub-basement with his father's shoe as his only armor, fulfilled, year after year, the promise his mother had wrestled from life. He didn't give up his books. He studied with a different hunger, that of one who knows the cost of every opportunity. And when the time came to choose a path, he didn't choose easy money or revenge. He chose law. He chose to learn the laws that had one day failed his father, so that they would never fail anyone else again. "Why law?" David asked him one afternoon, watching him review his notes at the table in that same house Sarah had insisted on keeping, even though she could have left it. "Because my dad wrote the truth on paper," the young man replied without looking up, "and no one wanted to read it. I want to be the one who reads it, who defends it, so that the next time a worker reports something, there's someone on the other side willing to listen. David had to look away so the boy wouldn't see him get emotional. As the seasons passed, the house with peeling walls transformed. Not into a palace, Sarah would never have allowed it, but into a dignified home. And in a corner of the living room, on a new shelf, next to Michael's smiling photograph, the small, worn shoe, with its sole tied with a string, still rested. One late spring afternoon, David went to visit them. He found Sarah contemplating that shoe with a serene smile on her face. "You know something, sir," she told him, without taking her eyes off the relic. "For years, I kept this shoe because it was the last thing Michael gave our son. I carried it in my purse every day to the tower and back, like someone carrying a piece of their soul. It was my way of feeling he was still walking beside us." She took the little shoe in her hands. "But recently I understood something. This shoe no longer speaks to me of a death. It speaks to me of a path." She looked up, her eyes bright. Michael said the day he bought it that he wanted to see his son walk towards a better future in these shoes. And even though he's not here to see it, that future has arrived. Our son is walking towards it with his head held high, without having to steal, or hate, or sell himself. Her voice filled with a deep peace. "This shoe is so small it no longer fits anyone, but look closely at it, sir. It was the one that taught us all to walk again." David looked at that humble object and understood that in his entire life, surrounded by expensive and glittering things, he had never owned anything as valuable as that little shoe with a string-tied sole. "Michael was right in his letter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I had stopped looking. I became a man so high up that I no longer saw the ground I walked on. And it took a woman who arrived by bus every day, carrying half a loaf of bread and a child's shoe, to teach me to look again, to remind me that true wealth never rides an elevator. It rides the bus with ordinary people, with their heads held high, even if the whole world decides not to look at them." Sarah smiled. Outside, the afternoon fell golden over the neighborhood streets, and in the distance, the unmistakable sound of a bus announced that life, with all its harshness and all its tenderness, went on. "You know what's strangest of all, sir?" Sarah said, placing the little shoe back next to the photograph. "That morning, when they singled me out in front of everyone and made me open my purse, I thought it was the worst day of my life. I thought I had lost the little I had left. My job, my name, my dignity." She closed her eyes for an instant, and it turned out to be the day when truth, after so many years, finally found its way to my door. Sometimes life humiliates us not to destroy us, but to force the world to see what was always there, invisible, waiting to be seen. And so, in that simple home, where love had conquered greed, where forgiveness had weighed more than resentment, and where a small, worn shoe had taught 3 broken people to walk again, the lesson that no glass tower, however tall, had ever managed to teach was forever imprinted. That no one is invisible, that no act of kindness is ever truly lost, and that sooner or later, the truth always, always comes home.